The iron was still warm when they dragged her into the yard. Not red hot, just hot enough to scare. That was how the town did things when it decided guilt mattered more than truth. Men stood in a loose circle, hats pulled low, eyes avoiding hers but not the accusation burning between them. "Thief," someone muttered. She didn't fight, didn't scream. She just looked at the ground like it might open and swallow her whole. Her hands shook, not because she was weak, but because she knew how easily lies could harden into something permanent. The cowboy arrived late. Dust on his coat, a long ride behind him. He took in the scene in one breath, the rope on her wrists, the iron, the way the sheriff wouldn't quite meet his eyes. "What's this?" he asked, voice low. "Your housekeeper," the sheriff said, "caught stealing, silver gone, town money too." The cowboy's jaw tightened. He looked at her then, not searching for guilt but for fear. There was fear, plenty of it. But not guilt. "From where?" he asked. "Your house," the sheriff replied. The words settled heavy. "My house," the cowboy repeated. He stepped into the circle, took the iron from the man holding it and plunged it into the dirt. Steam hissed. A few men shifted uncomfortably. "No one touches her," he said, "not until I look." The sheriff scoffed. "You calling the town liars?" "I'm calling for proof," the cowboy replied, "and I'm calling for time." He cut the rope himself. She almost fell when her hands were free, legs weak beneath her. He steadied her without hesitation. "Go to the barn," he murmured. "Stay there." She nodded and fled, eyes blurred with tears she refused to let fall in front of them. The cowboy rode home alone. He didn't storm, didn't shout. He searched. Drawers first, then floorboards, then the old trunk in the spare room, the one that had always been locked. He broke it open with the butt of his revolver. Inside, silver, coins, town funds wrapped in oilcloth, and beneath it all, a ledger with familiar handwriting. His nephew's. The boy he'd taken in after his sister died. The boy who'd been quiet, polite, always watching. The boy who'd been sleeping under his roof while a woman was nearly ruined for his crimes. The cowboy sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, ledger heavy in his hands. Betrayal cuts deepest when it knows where you sleep. That night he rode back to town. The square was quiet. Lanterns burned low. He dismounted in front of the sheriff's office and kicked the door open. He laid the ledger on the desk. Then the silver. Then the coins. "Here, your thief," he said, "and here's your proof." The sheriff paled as he flipped pages. The handwriting was undeniable. Dates, amounts, lies laid bare. "Where is he?" the sheriff asked. "At my house," the cowboy replied, "waiting." By morning, the truth had spread faster than the lie ever did. They came to the ranch quiet this time, hats in hands, apologies awkward and unfinished. No one mentioned the iron. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching them from a distance. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. The cowboy stood beside her. "They'll clear your name," he said, "publicly." She nodded. "That won't give me back last night." "No," he agreed, "but it'll stop the next one." When the nephew was led away, crying and angry and small, the cowboy didn't look at him. Some lessons arrived too late to teach gently. The town held a meeting. Words were spoken. Names were corrected. Her name, once dragged through dust, was lifted back where it belonged. But what mattered most happened quietly later. The cowboy replaced the porch rail where her fingers had clenched in fear. He planted new trees along the drive. He fixed what he could, not to erase the past, but to make room for something better. One evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, she spoke. "You believed me." "I knew," he said simply. She looked at him then, really looked. "Why?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because thieves hide," he said, "and you were standing right in the open." The wind moved through the grass. The house stood honest again. And the town learned something it would not soon forget. Sometimes the danger isn't the stranger you accuse. It's the one you trusted enough to let inside. After the town cleared her name, silence settled in, an uneasy kind like dust after a stampede. People avoided her eyes when she passed, not out of cruelty this time, but shame. Apologies came in pieces, a loaf of bread left on the step, a mended fence no one admitted fixing, a child shyly offering wildflowers with no explanation. She accepted none of it openly. Healing, she'd learned, didn't come from repayment. It came from safety. The cowboy changed too. He slept lighter, listened harder. Doors that once stayed open at night were now checked twice, not because he feared the world, but because he understood how easily trust could be misplaced. One evening, weeks later, she found him in the barn staring at an empty stall. He was family, she said quietly. He nodded, so were you. That was the first time he'd said it. Winter crept in early. Snow pressed the land flat and honest. The ranch became a refuge in ways neither of them had planned. Travelers stranded by storms were welcomed without questions. A widow and her boys stayed a month. A wounded rider stayed longer. And every time someone arrived afraid, she remembered the iron. She never let fear decide again. One night the sheriff returned, alone this time, hat in his hands. "We were wrong," he said, "about more than just the theft." She waited. "There's talk," he continued, "about changing how things are done." The cowboy crossed his arms. "Talk cheap." The sheriff met his gaze. "Then help us make it expensive." By spring, things had shifted. No more public punishments without proof. No more rumors treated like verdicts. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. Different mattered. On the anniversary of the accusation, she stood in the yard alone at dawn. The brand mark that never happened still burned in memory. She pressed her palm to her wrist where the rope had been. The cowboy approached quietly. "You don't owe this place anything," he said, "if you want to go." "I'm not staying because I owe," she interrupted gently. "I'm staying because I choose." He exhaled, something heavy leaving him. They didn't speak of love. They didn't need to. What they built was stronger than words. Days that didn't flinch, nights that felt earned, and a home where truth was defended even when it hurt. Years later, when people told the story, they always focused on the discovery, the ledger, the nephew, the shame. They missed the real ending. A woman once nearly branded by lies stood tall again. A cowboy learned that justice starts at home. And a town discovered, too late for some and just in time for others, that the cost of truth is always less than the price of silence. Time did what it always does when people stop fighting it. It softened the sharpest edges, but it never erased the line where things had once gone wrong. The ranch carried that history the way old trees carry lightning scars, not as weakness, but as proof of survival. She took on more responsibility without announcing it. Account books, wages, supplies. When the cowboy left for long rides, the ranch ran the same, better even. The hands listened to her, not because she demanded it, but because she never spoke without meaning. One afternoon, a young woman arrived with a swollen eye and a child on her hip. No horse, no story ready. "Can I stay just one night?" she asked. She didn't hesitate. "You can stay as long as you need." The cowboy watched from the porch, understanding immediately. This was how it happened now. The broken found their way to those who had learned how to stand back up. That winter, the nephew escaped custody. The news reached them at dusk, carried by a breathless rider. "Sheriff says he's heading north," the man warned. "Could be anywhere." The cowboy checked his rifle. Old instincts stirred. She touched his arm. "He won't come here." "You don't know that." "I do," she said quietly. "He can't face the truth in this place." She was right. The nephew was caught 2 days later hiding in a river culvert, half frozen and alone. When the news arrived, the cowboy let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That night they sat by the fire longer than usual. "I used to think strength was standing your ground," the cowboy said. She looked at the flames. "It still is." "No," he corrected gently. "Strength is knowing when to stand for someone else." Spring returned. The trees he had planted after the accusation bloomed for the first time. White flowers scattered across the yard like quiet forgiveness. She stood among them, sunlight on her hair. "They're beautiful," she said. "They took," he replied. "That's all I hoped for." She turned to him then, voice steady. "I want to put my name on this place." He frowned slightly. "It already is." "No," she said. "Not because you gave it, because we built it." He considered her words, then nodded once. They rode into town together the next week. Papers were signed. Names were written, not as husband and wife, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals. When they returned, the house felt different, not larger, not richer. Just finished. And if you asked anyone in the valley what changed after the thief was found, they'd tell you about justice, about fairness, about mistakes learned from. But if you listened carefully, you'd hear the truer answer. A woman who was almost destroyed by a lie chose to stay and make truth louder than fear. And a cowboy learned that the strongest thing he ever built wasn't a fence or a house. It was a place where no one would ever be branded without being heard again. The summer after her name was written into the deed was the hottest anyone could remember. Dust hung in the air like breath held too long. Tempers flared easily in town, but on the ranch things stayed steady. Work had a way of calming what words could not. They rose early. They rested when the sun demanded it. They spoke when it mattered. One afternoon, a boy from town rode out hard, panic in the way he handled the reins. "They've got a girl tied up by the old cottonwood," he blurted. "They say she stole medicine." She and the cowboy didn't exchange a word. They were mounted within seconds. When they arrived, it felt like stepping backward in time. The same posture, the same certainty in wrongness. Men standing close together so they wouldn't have to stand alone with their doubt. The girl at the tree couldn't have been more than 16. Blood streaked her sleeve where rope had cut skin. Her eyes were wild, not with guilt but with memory. The cowboy dismounted slowly. "Untie her," he said. "She confessed," someone argued, "same as the last one." "No," the woman said, voice cutting through the heat, "not the same." She stepped forward, close enough that the girl could see her face. "What did they take from you?" she asked gently. The girl swallowed. "My brother's sick. They said the doctor wouldn't come without pay." The woman nodded. "And the medicine?" "I took it from the store," the girl whispered. "I was going to bring the money later." Silence spread outward, uncomfortable and heavy. The store owner shifted. "She broke the law." "So did we," the woman replied evenly. "When we decided punishment comes before understanding." The rope was cut. The girl collapsed into the woman's arms, sobbing hard enough to shake them both. The cowboy turned to the men. "You want to fix this," he said quietly. "You start by riding with us to the doctor." No one argued. That night the girl slept safely on the ranch. Her brother lived. The town paid the doctor themselves. No irons were heated. No lies were spoken into permanence. Later, sitting on the porch as cicadas sang into the dark, the cowboy spoke. "You saw it coming," he said. She nodded. "Once you've stood where she stood, you recognize the moment before it happens again." He looked out over the land they shared. "You stopped it." "We did," she corrected. In the years that followed, the ranch became something more than land and buildings. It became a place people rode toward when fear got loud. A place where questions were asked before judgments made. A place where truth was slower, but stronger. And when people asked her why she stayed in a town that had once nearly destroyed her, she always answered the same way. Because leaving would have meant they won. The cowboy would hear that and smile to himself. Not because the past was forgotten, but because it no longer had the final word.